Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the darkest corners of the prison world. Angola Prison isn't just the largest maximum security facility in the United States. It's a place where men go to live and for most to die. With over 5,000 inmates and a history rooted in slavery and violence, Angola is a world of secrets, survival, and stark humanity. And inside its walls, life and death take on a meaning unlike anywhere else in America. Louisiana State Penitentiary, known simply as Angola, is unlike any other prison in the United States. Located on 18,000 acres of farmland in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, the facility is so large it is often compared to a small city. But the land carries a grim legacy. It once operated as a slave plantation. The name Angola itself comes from the African country where many of the enslaved people brought to work on the plantation originated. When the prison was established in the late 19th century, it inherited not only the land but also the systems of forced labor and racial control that define the South. From its earliest days, Angola functioned less like a correctional institution and more like a continuation of slavery under another name. Prisoners, mostly black men, were forced into brutal labor in the fields. Reports describe overseers riding on horseback with shotguns, much like slave drivers, ensuring inmates picked cotton or harvested crops under the scorching Louisiana sun. Whippings, beatings, and solitary confinement were common punishments. Even today, critics argue that Angola remains haunted by this past, as the prison still uses inmates to work vast agricultural fields where soybeans, cotton, corn, and even cattle are raised. By sheer scale, Angola dwarfs every other prison in America. With more than 5,000 men incarcerated there, it holds nearly 1 out of every 7 prisoners in the state of Louisiana. Unlike many prisons where inmates might serve fixed sentences, Angola houses a population in which the majority will never leave alive. According to reports, more than 80% of prisoners are serving life without parole, many for violent crimes, though advocates point to systemic racial and economic inequality that shaped their paths into the justice system. The result is an institution where life sentence quite literally means life. Former Warden Burl Cain, who oversaw Angola from 1995 to 2016, once put it bluntly, the only way out of Angola for most is in a hearse. Yet for all its darkness, Angola is a paradox. Inside its gates, there is an entire ecosystem. It has its own farm system, multiple churches, a museum, a massive rodeo that attracts visitors from across the South, and, most uniquely, a hospice program run by inmates for inmates, providing care to those dying behind bars. The prison's vastness also makes it one of the most secure in the world. Surrounded on 3 sides by the Mississippi River and guarded by heavily armed towers, escape is virtually impossible. Its geography reinforces a sense of total finality. Those who enter know they may never walk free again. But Angola is not only about confinement. It's about what happens when thousands of men are forced to build entire lives inside walls they cannot escape. Some turn to faith, others to work, some to violence. And for a few, redemption comes through acts of service, particularly in the hospice program that has been hailed as one of the most humane aspects of American corrections. The duality of Angola, the brutality of its history and the glimpses of humanity within, makes it one of the most studied, debated, and feared prisons in the United States. As we go deeper into this story, we'll uncover not just the prison's bloody past, but also how men live, die, and sometimes find meaning inside the walls of the world's largest maximum security prison. On certain weekends, Angola transforms into something few would expect, a carnival ground. Every spring and fall, thousands of visitors line up outside the prison gates for what's billed as the wildest show in the South, the Angola Prison Rodeo. For most people, the phrase prison rodeo sounds like fiction. But here, it's one of Angola's most enduring and controversial traditions. Since 1965, inmates have competed in a series of dangerous rodeo events, facing bulls and broncos in front of a paying public. The spectacle draws crowds of more than 10,000 spectators at a time, who come not only for the rodeo itself but also for the inmate-run craft fair, where prisoners sell handmade furniture, paintings, and leatherwork. The rodeo began as a way to provide entertainment for inmates and guards, but under Warden Burl Cain, it expanded into a major public attraction. The arena, once modest, was renovated into a 10,000-seat coliseum, making it the only prison in the United States with such a venue. Tickets sell out weeks in advance, and the event generates significant revenue, much of it reinvested into prison programs. But the rodeo isn't just about entertainment or money, it's a window into Angola's contradictions. The events, dangerous spectacle. The rodeo is not for the faint of heart. Events have names like convict poker, where 4 inmates sit around a card table while an angry bull is released into the arena. The last man remaining seated wins. In Guts and Glory, a poker chip is tied to the horn of a bull, and dozens of prisoners charge at the animal, risking serious injury for a small cash prize. Unlike professional rodeo riders, the Angola participants receive little to no training. Injuries are common. Broken bones, concussions and gashes are part of the spectacle. To outsiders it often looks brutal. To inmates it's a chance for a rare thrill, a taste of freedom and sometimes a way to earn respect among peers. Some also see it as redemption, a way to prove courage in front of a public that otherwise views them only as criminals. The marketplace, life behind the walls on display. Beyond the arena, the Angola Rodeo hosts a vast inmate craft fair. Rows of booths are filled with wooden swings, leather belts, paintings and jewelry, all made by prisoners in workshops inside the prison. For some inmates, it's the only opportunity to interact with the outside world, as they meet the public face-to-face and sell their creations. Families visiting loved ones often stop here to purchase keepsakes, and collectors from across Louisiana come specifically for inmate art. This marketplace provides a glimpse into the lives of men who may never leave Angola. For those serving life sentences, their work becomes their legacy, a way to leave something tangible behind. Praise and criticism. The rodeo has been both celebrated and condemned. Supporters argue that it brings much-needed funds, boosts inmate morale, and allows prisoners to demonstrate skill and creativity. For some inmates, it is one of the few times they feel seen as human. Critics, however, call it exploitative, likening it to a modern-day Roman arena where society watches marginalized men risk their lives for entertainment. Advocacy groups have argued that while Angola's history is already tied to slavery and exploitation, the rodeo only reinforces the prison's image as a spectacle of human suffering. Still, year after year, the Angola Rodeo remains a massive draw. For the outside world, it's an unusual tourist attraction. For the inmates, it's a reminder of Angola's unique place in American culture. A prison that functions not just as a place of punishment, but as a city, an economy, and, at least for one weekend, a stage. The rodeo encapsulates the paradox of Angola: brutality and humanity, punishment and performance, suffering and survival. And as visitors leave with souvenirs and stories, the inmates return to their cells, back to the reality of a life sentence. When you step inside Angola, the first thing that becomes clear is this: most of the men here are never getting out. Unlike many prisons in the United States where parole or reduced sentences offer a chance at release, Angola is defined by finality. The numbers behind Angola's population. More than 5,000 inmates live at Angola, making it the largest maximum security prison in the United States. Of those, over 80% are serving life sentences without parole. This means that for the vast majority, freedom is not a possibility. They will live and die behind these walls. This extraordinary number didn't happen by accident. It reflects Louisiana's harsh sentencing laws, which are among the toughest in the country. For decades, the state has been known for its tough-on-crime policies, handing out life without parole sentences at rates far higher than the national average. Many of those incarcerated are not just convicted murderers or violent offenders. Some are serving life sentences for crimes committed in their youth, before parole reforms existed. The result is a prison where the average age of inmates is steadily climbing, and where men who once entered as teenagers or young adults grow old behind bars. In fact, Angola has one of the largest populations of elderly prisoners in the United States. Life without parole, the other death penalty. Criminal justice advocates often describe life without parole, LWOP, as the other death penalty. Unlike capital punishment, which involves execution, LWOP stretches the punishment across decades, until death arrives naturally. For inmates, it means waking up every day knowing there is no release date, no second chance, no path back to society. One Angola prisoner once told journalists, "When that judge said life without parole, it was like I stopped existing as a person. They buried me alive in this place." This sense of hopelessness shapes Angola's environment. Violence, despair, and depression are constant threats. Yet within this reality, some inmates turn to faith, labor, or education to carve out meaning in their sentences. Angola has multiple churches run by inmates, Bible colleges, and even programs where men can earn degrees. Though for most, those degrees will never be used outside prison walls. The impact on families. For families on the outside, life without parole means a permanent separation. Mothers, fathers, and children often travel hours across Louisiana to visit loved ones, knowing those visits will be the only connection until death. Generations are divided by prison walls. In some cases, both father and son end up serving time at Angola, creating a cycle of incarceration that never breaks. The cost of long-term incarceration is also staggering. Housing thousands of elderly inmates, many of whom require expensive medical care, has placed enormous financial strain on the state of Louisiana. Critics argue that keeping aging men locked away, many of whom pose little risk to society, makes little sense, but political resistance to parole reform has kept the system in place. The cemetery at Angola, Point Lookout 2. Nowhere is the permanence of Angola more visible than at Point Lookout 2, the prison cemetery. Since most inmates will die inside, Angola maintains a burial ground where prisoners are laid to rest. Wooden crosses, often handmade by fellow inmates, mark the graves. Some carry names, others simply say, unknown. Funerals at Angola are conducted by inmate ministers, attended by other prisoners who volunteer as pallbearers. The cemetery serves as a stark reminder of Warden Kane's famous words, "The only way out of Angola for most is in a hearse." As a result, the institution is not just a prison, it is a city of the condemned, where life plays out from youth to old age, from health to sickness, and finally to death. And yet, in this place where despair might be expected to reign, there are surprising acts of humanity, particularly in the hospice program, where inmates care for each other in their final days. In a place where most men know they will die behind bars, death is not an abstract idea. It's part of daily life. Angola is not just a prison, it's also a place of aging, sickness, and funerals. And yet, out of this harsh reality came something unexpected: the Angola Prison Hospice Program. Founded in 1998, the hospice was created to address a painful truth. Many inmates were dying in cold, lonely hospital beds, with no one to comfort them in their final moments. Staff shortages and the sheer size of Angola meant dying men often passed away alone. The hospice program changed that. For the first time, inmates began volunteering to care for their fellow prisoners as they faced death. A radical idea in a place of punishment. The idea was groundbreaking. Inmates, some serving life for violent crimes, became caregivers. They sat by hospital beds, changed bandages, administered pain medication under nurse supervision, and even held hands in the final hours. They read scripture, wrote letters to families, and sang hymns at the bedside of dying men. One volunteer caregiver explained it simply: "We can't change the past. But in here, I can make sure another man doesn't die alone." This shift turned Angola into a place where compassion, rarely associated with maximum security prisons, became visible. How it works. The hospice wing at Angola operates much like any hospital unit, but with a unique twist: the nurses are inmates themselves. Volunteers go through months of training, learning not just medical basics but also counseling and emotional support. Once trained, they provide around-the-clock care for dying prisoners. Each patient receives comfort care, clean sheets, pain management, regular meals, and, most importantly, companionship. The program emphasizes dignity at the end of life, something many men never experienced in freedom. Families are often allowed special visits to say goodbye, and in some cases, inmate volunteers write letters or record final messages for loved ones when family members cannot be present. Serving Life, the documentary. The hospice gained national attention in 2011, when filmmaker Lisa R. Cohen released the documentary Serving Life. Narrated by actor Forrest Whitaker, the film gave the world a rare look inside Angola's hospice. It showed hardened men, tattooed and shackled, tenderly bathing dying prisoners or singing gospel hymns at their bedsides. The documentary stunned viewers. Many had never seen convicted murderers or lifers display such vulnerability and care. Critics praised it as a profound exploration of humanity in the darkest of places. The hospice program became a model for prisons nationwide, inspiring similar efforts in other states. Meaning in a place without hope. For the inmate caregivers, hospice work offers something rare at Angola: purpose. Many describe it as life-changing, a way to redeem themselves after years of destruction. One volunteer said, "When I came to prison, I took lives. In here, I get to give something back before I die." For the dying, it provides a final comfort: the knowledge that they won't be forgotten, that even in prison their last breath matters. Funerals, too, are handled with dignity. Fellow inmates act as pallbearers, carrying handmade wooden coffins to Point Lookout 2 Cemetery, where the dead are laid to rest. Volunteers dig graves, build coffins, and offer prayers, Rituals that remind everyone inside Angola that humanity still exists here. Praise and criticism. Supporters call Angola's hospice program one of the most humane initiatives in U.S. prisons. It shows that even in a place defined by violence and punishment, empathy can thrive. Critics, however, argue that such programs highlight the cruelty of life without parole. They ask, why must men die in prison at all? Why not allow aging, nonviolent prisoners to be released to die with their families? For them, hospice is not a solution but a band-aid on a broken system. Yet within Angola's walls, where release is almost never an option, the hospice represents a powerful truth. Even in a place built on despair, life can end with dignity, care, and compassion. Angola is often called a city within a prison. With more than 5,000 inmates, sprawling farmland, workshops, schools, and churches, daily life here resembles a closed society. Everyone has a role to play, whether through work, worship, or simply surviving the relentless grind of time. Work in the fields, modern prison plantation. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Angola is its labor system. On any given day, inmates can be seen working vast stretches of farmland, harvesting crops like soybeans, cotton, and corn under the hot Louisiana sun. Men march in long lines, watched by correctional officers on horseback carrying rifles, an image eerily similar to the prison's origins as a slave plantation. Critics, including civil rights groups, have long argued that Angola's field labor is a direct continuation of slavery. Louisiana law requires able-bodied inmates to work, and at Angola, that often means long hours of hard physical labor for little or no pay. Some earn just a few cents an hour, with good time credit meaningless for lifers who will never leave. Supporters of the system, including prison officials, argue that farm work teaches discipline, provides structure, and lowers violence. Still, for many inmates, the fields are a daily reminder that Angola's past continues to shape its present. Workshops and industries. Not all work takes place in the fields. Angola also runs industries, wood shops, metal shops, and garment factories. Here, inmates craft everything from license plates to furniture. These jobs are often considered more desirable, offering air conditioning, slightly better pay, and valuable skills. The prison's craft fair, tied to the Angola Rodeo, gives artisans a rare chance to sell their creations to the outside world. For some, it's a way to connect with family or leave behind a tangible legacy. Worship and faith, finding redemption inside. Angola is also known for its deep religious life. Warden Burl Kane, who led the prison for more than 20 years, strongly promoted faith-based programs. He partnered with the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary to establish a Bible college inside the prison. Inmates could study theology, become ministers, and even lead their own congregations. Today, Angola has multiple chapels and inmate-led churches. Some prisoners have become ordained ministers, preaching to their peers and even officiating funerals at the prison cemetery. For men serving life without parole, faith often provides the only hope they will ever know. Kane once explained his philosophy bluntly: if you want to control a prison, get religion in it. While critics saw this as coercion, others praised the way faith-based programs lowered violence and gave men purpose. Survival and the prison code. Of course, survival at Angola is not just about work and worship. It's about navigating the prison's social order. Like most maximum security facilities, Angola has gangs, hierarchies, and unspoken rules. Respect is currency, and disrespect can lead to violence. Some prisoners withdraw into isolation, avoiding conflict at all costs. Others align themselves with groups for protection. In a prison where almost everyone is serving life, disputes can escalate quickly, as men with nothing to lose are more willing to fight. Still, Angola's sheer size and Warden Kane's focus on structured programs have kept it from descending into chaos like other maximum security prisons. While violence exists, many describe Angola as a strange mix of brutality and order, despair and purpose. A city of the condemned. Walking Angola's grounds, one sees the contradictions clearly. On one side, men in shackles labor in cotton fields under guard. On another, inmate pastors preach sermons about redemption. In the workshops, artisans sand down wooden chairs or paint portraits, while in the hospice wing, volunteers hold the hands of dying men. Angola is more than a prison. It is an entire society, built on the premise that most of its residents will never leave. For outsiders, this makes it a symbol of America's harshest punishments. For those inside, it is simply home, a place where they must find ways to live, work, and die with whatever dignity they can claim. For all its programs, churches, and rodeos, Angola has always carried a reputation for violence. To many, It is not just the largest prison in America, it is one of the most dangerous. A history written in blood. Throughout the 20th century, Angola was often described as the bloodiest prison in America. Reports of stabbings, beatings, and killings filled court cases and newspaper articles. Guards were outnumbered, inmates were desperate, and the vast fields offered few places to hide from brutality. In 1952, an infamous uprising brought Angola into national headlines. 31 inmates slashed their own Achilles tendons with razor blades in protest of inhumane treatment. They were tired of the constant brutality, starvation, and abuse. Their act of mutilation was not an attempt at escape, it was a desperate cry for the world to notice what was happening inside. Decades later, in the 1970s and 1980s, Angola's violence became tied to one of the most notorious cases in U.S. prison history, the Angola Three. The Angola Three. The Angola Three were a group of Black Panther Party members, Albert Woodfix, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, who were placed in solitary confinement for decades after being accused of murdering a guard in 1972. King spent 29 years in solitary before his conviction was overturned. Wallace spent more than 40 years before dying shortly after his release. Woodfix spent 43 years in solitary, making him one of the longest-serving solitary confinement prisoners in U.S. history, before his release in 2016. Their cases drew international attention, with Amnesty International and human rights groups condemning Louisiana for cruel and unusual punishment. Woodfix later wrote in his memoir Solitary that Angola was not just a prison, but a place designed to break the human spirit. You survive by finding meaning even if they bury you alive in a cell. Control through fear and order. Warden Burl Cain, who took over in 1995, made it his mission to change Angola's violent reputation. He emphasized strict order, religious programs, and the idea of redemption through faith. Supporters say his leadership lowered violence significantly, turning Angola into a more stable prison. Critics argue that Cain's approach was authoritarian and overly reliant on religion as a form of control. Under Cain, violence dropped, but Angola never lost its edge. For men serving life without parole, the constant presence of despair means tensions simmer. Fights erupt over debts, disrespect, or gang rivalries. Guards remain armed and vigilant, and inmate trust is fragile. Death row at Angola. Adding to Angola's notoriety is its death row, one of the largest in the United States. Men sentenced to execution live in isolation until their final day, when they are transported to Louisiana's death chamber, also housed at Angola. While executions have slowed in recent years due to legal challenges and drug shortages, the presence of death row underscores Angola's identity as a place of ultimate punishment. The cost of violence. Every act of violence inside Angola carries a weight beyond the prison walls. Families of victims relive trauma. Families of inmates watch their loved ones grow old, or die, behind bars. And the state of Louisiana continues to face lawsuits and scrutiny for its handling of prisoners, especially those in solitary confinement or enduring medical neglect. Even today, Angola sits at the center of debates over mass incarceration, racial inequality, and human rights in America. It is both a working prison farm and a living reminder of the darker chapters of U.S. punishment. If Angola is a place where most men serve life until they die naturally, then its death row is where the state carries out the ultimate punishment. Tucked within Angola's vast compound is Louisiana's execution chamber, one of the most infamous in the United States. Life on death row. Louisiana's death row houses dozens of men sentenced to die by lethal injection. Unlike the general population, these prisoners live in near total isolation. Locked inside small cells for 23 hours a day, they have little contact with others and almost no programs or work opportunities. For them, time passes differently. Days blur into weeks and weeks into years as they await appeals or their scheduled execution date. For some, death row stretches across decades. Delays, legal battles, and changes in execution protocols often mean men spend 20 or 30 years waiting for the state to carry out their sentences. Many die of old age or illness before the executioner arrives. The death chamber. Louisiana's execution chamber sits inside Angola, stark and clinical. It was once outfitted for electrocution with the infamous gruesome Gertie electric chair, which carried out executions until the 1990s. Today the chamber is designed for lethal injection. A padded gurney sits at the center, with 4 lines prepared for the condemned man's final moment. Witnesses watch through glass windows. Family members of victims on one side, family of the inmate on the other, and media in between. Executions at Angola have slowed in recent years due to shortages of lethal injection drugs and ongoing legal challenges. But the chamber remains a symbol of the prison's identity as the ultimate destination for Louisiana's harshest sentences. Debate over justice. Supporters of the death penalty argue that Angola's execution chamber provides justice and closure for victims' families. Critics, however, see it as another layer of cruelty in a prison already synonymous with life and death. Organizations like the ACLU and Amnesty International have repeatedly condemned Louisiana's use of both life without parole and the death penalty, pointing to racial disparities and inadequate legal defense for many condemned men. Whether carried out by natural causes in the hospice program or by the state in the execution chamber, Angola remains a place where death is part of the institution's design. It is a prison that does not just hold men, it buries them. Angola Prison is a place of contradictions. It is a working farm and a fortress, a rodeo arena and a cemetery, a place of suffering and a place of compassion. It has been called the Alcatraz of the South and the bloodiest prison in America, but it has also produced remarkable stories of faith, redemption, and humanity, most visible in the hospice program where lifers care for each other until the very end. Former Warden Burl Cain once said, "The only way out of Angola for most is in a hearse." And he was right. For thousands of men, Angola is not a stop on the way to freedom, it is the final destination. But within these walls, amid the despair, there are men who have found ways to live, to give, and to die with dignity. That is the paradox of Angola, a place built on punishment, yet filled with stories of humanity that refuse to be silenced. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden world of crime and punishment. Share this documentary with others to keep these stories alive, and let's keep the conversation going in the comments below.